You find yourself standing in a narrow corridor deep within Topkapi Palace. The year 1520. The walls around you are covered with golden glazed tiles, but the air tastes of fear and rose oil. Your silk slippers make no sound on the polished marble as you follow the elderly head eunuch ahead of you, his shadow dancing in the flickering candlelight. You are 15 years old, and you have just been selected as one of the Sultan's newest concubines. The head eunuch stops suddenly and turns to face you, his eyes holding a mixture of pity and cold efficiency. "Listen carefully, child," he whispers, his voice barely audible above the distant sound of water trickling from ornamental fountains. "What I am about to tell you will determine whether you live or die in this place. These are not mere customs or traditions. They are the invisible chains that bind every woman who enters the Sultan's chambers." Your heart pounds against your ribs as you realize that everything you thought you knew about palace luxury and honor was a beautiful lie. The real rules of the harem are about to be revealed, and they are stranger and more terrifying than anything you could have imagined. Before I share this story, I want to strengthen our connection. The comments and messages I receive after each video deeply affect me. History isn't just dry events written in books. It's real pain and triumphs experienced by real people. If these stories touch you deeply too, you can support this channel's growth to help more people hear these forgotten voices. Pressing the like button and subscribing isn't just for the algorithm. It's showing respect for the memory of these women. First rule: only the chosen may approach the Sultan. Despite hundreds of concubines in the harem, only those selected as favorites could enter the Sultan's presence. This selection process was a terrifying competition of beauty and intelligence. Concubines had to appear perfect every day, give the wittiest answers, and display the most enchanting mannerisms. But what's truly horrifying is how this selection was made. Every morning, the head eunuch would walk through different sections of the harem and examine the women. A glance, a gesture, even the way you breathed could determine your fate. Being chosen was a great honor, but also a great danger. Because if you failed to capture the Sultan's interest, you might never get another chance. Hades, a concubine who had survived 3 years in the harem, whispers this truth to you, girl. Being chosen is the line between death and life. No woman in this palace is as powerful as the Sultan's favorites, but none are as wretched as those he has discarded. Second rule: silence and submission. Speaking in the Sultan's presence was forbidden. Only when asked a direct question could you respond. But even this response had to follow certain patterns. You must begin with this worthless concubine. Never say "I" and negate your own existence. This linguistic rule wasn't just about respect. It was to reprogram your brain, to make you forget your own identity. As months passed, many concubines became unable to think of themselves as "I," even when alone. They became fragmented beings, their very thoughts colonized by the grammar of submission. Most horrifying was the punishment for violating this rule. If you forgot and said "I want" or "I think," you were immediately punished. First violation meant a week of starvation. Second meant whipping. Third meant being sent to serve the eunuchs, which was considered worse than death. Third rule: the eye contact prohibition. During intimate moments with the Sultan, you could never make direct eye contact. Your gaze had to be fixed on a point just below his chin. This seemed like a show of respect, but the real reason was much darker. Eye contact creates intimacy, and intimacy creates complications. The Sultan must be able to use your body without confronting your humanity. If he saw fear, pain, or homesickness in your eyes, he might hesitate. If he saw the intelligence burning behind your gaze, he might wonder what you were thinking, what you were planning. Worse still, if you looked into his eyes, you might discover that the divine ruler was just a lonely, frightened man. This discovery was doubly dangerous. The fate of those who violated this rule became legend in the harem. If a concubine accidentally met the Sultan's gaze, she had to immediately prostrate herself and beg forgiveness, not for disrespect, but for the audacity of treating him as an equal. Repeated violations were punished not with death, but something worse: serving alongside the eunuchs, spending the rest of your life as a reminder to other women of what happens when you forget your place. Fourth rule: controlled silence. During the most intimate moments, you had to maintain complete silence unless the Sultan specifically commanded you to make noise. This wasn't about discretion or modesty, it was about control. Your pleasure, your pain, your very breath had to be regulated by his will. If you cried out spontaneously, you were acknowledging that you had an independent physical response, a body existing beyond his control. This could not be tolerated. The enforcement of this rule created a horrifying theater of intimacy. Women learned to hold their breath, to bite their tongues until they bled, to dissociate so completely from their bodies that they felt nothing at all. The Sultan, meanwhile, became addicted to the power of commanding response. He might spend an entire night trying to break a woman's silence, not through pleasure, but through pain, endurance, and the simple assertion of his will over her autonomy. Some women broke under this pressure. They developed a condition palace physicians couldn't name, a complete inability to make any sound at all. Even when alone, they became living ghosts, their voices stolen by the impossible demands of imperial desire. Fifth rule: timing in sacred seed. The Sultan's climax must always come last, but not from any consideration for his partner's pleasure. Instead, his release represented the moment when cosmic order was restored. His seed was considered sacred, a direct connection to divine mandate. For a concubine to reach her peak before him would be tantamount to suggesting that mortal pleasure could supersede divine will. This created a nightmarish calculation for the women involved. They had to constantly monitor not only their own responses, but also read the subtle signs of the Sultan's arousal. They became experts in the art of suppression, learning to delay or prevent their own climax through sheer force of will. Some developed mental distraction techniques so effective they could recite entire poems or perform complex mathematical calculations while their bodies were being used. Sixth rule: postcoital immobility. Once the Sultan finished, the concubine had to remain in position, usually prostrate, until he gave permission to move. This could last minutes or hours, depending on his mood. But during this time, she wasn't allowed to clean herself, adjust her position for comfort, or show any sign of physical discomfort. The purpose of this rule was to reinforce the fundamental inequality of the exchange. The Sultan could immediately return to his normal state, dress, call for refreshments, even summon other concubines. But the woman who had just served him had to remain frozen in absolute vulnerability, her body still bearing evidence of their encounter, until he decided to release her from this final act of submission. Seventh rule: pregnancy reporting. If a concubine became pregnant, she had to immediately report it to the head eunuch, not to the Sultan himself. But here was the twist: she had to report it, even if uncertain, even if only suspicious. The penalty for failing to report a pregnancy was death. But the penalty for false reporting was a beating that left permanent scars. This created constant anxiety about every bodily function. Women became hypervigilant about their cycles, appetite, energy levels. They developed elaborate systems for tracking and monitoring their own bodies, turning their physicality into a source of terror rather than strength. The lucky ones learned to read the signs accurately. The unlucky ones guessed wrong and bore the consequences on their skin. But the most insidious aspect of this rule was what happened to confirmed pregnancies. The concubine was immediately isolated from all other women and placed under constant surveillance. She wasn't being protected, she was being monitored to ensure she didn't attempt to terminate the pregnancy or harm herself. The potential heir was valuable. The woman carrying it was merely a vessel that had to be kept functional. Eighth rule: witnessing and surveillance. Certain encounters had to be observed by eunuchs or senior concubines, not for the Sultan's pleasure, but to ensure rules were being followed. These witnesses were required to report any violations, any signs of genuine emotion, any evidence that the concubine was experiencing the encounter as anything other than sacred duty. This created a terrifying panopticon of sexual surveillance. Women never knew when they were being watched, never knew who might be reporting on their performance. They had to maintain the facade of perfect submission, even when they thought unobserved, because the consequences of being caught in a moment of authenticity were severe. Ninth rule: gifts and manipulation. The Sultan occasionally bestowed gifts on his concubines: jewelry, silks, delicacies. But these gifts came with invisible strings attached. Accepting a gift meant accepting a debt that could never be repaid. More insidiously, Gifts were used to create hierarchies and jealousies among the women. A concubine who received a valuable present became a target for resentment from others. But refusing a gift was seen as an insult to the Sultan's generosity. Women were trapped in a system where every kindness was a weapon and every reward was punishment. 10th rule: family hostages. The concubines' families were essentially held hostage to ensure compliance. But the threat wasn't just against their lives, it was against their honor, social standing, ability to marry and have children. The concubine who displeased the Sultan didn't just risk her own death. She risked the destruction of everyone she had ever loved. This created a psychological burden extending far beyond the palace walls. Concubines carried the weight of multiple generations on their shoulders. They had to perform not just for their own survival, but for their entire family line's survival. 11th rule: aging and devaluation. As concubines aged, they had to find ways to maintain their appeal without appearing to try too hard. They had to age gracefully, but not noticeably. They had to accept their diminishing status while still competing for the Sultan's attention. Beauty rituals became increasingly desperate and dangerous. Women used lead-based cosmetics that poisoned their skin. They underwent painful procedures to maintain youthful appearance. The lucky ones died young, before having to face the slow degradation of their value in the Sultan's eyes. 12th rule: death and final choice. When a Sultan died, his concubines faced a choice that wasn't really a choice. They could volunteer to be buried with him, ensuring their honor and their family's security. Or they could live on as widows, forever marked by their association with a dead ruler, never able to remarry or have children of their own. Preparation for this final rule began from the moment a concubine entered the harem. She had to cultivate a relationship with death, learn to see it not as an ending but as duty fulfilled. 13th rule: resistance and humanity. Despite everything designed to break them, women who survived this system found ways to maintain their humanity, their connections to each other, their sense of self. They developed secret languages, coded conversations, hidden rituals that allowed them to remember who they were beneath the roles they were forced to play. Some forms of resistance were subtle. A glance held too long, a song hummed slightly off-key, a way of arranging flowers that spelled out messages only other concubines could read. Others were more dramatic: elaborate suicide plots, escape attempts, secret pregnancies hidden from palace authorities. Women who attempted these acts of rebellion knew the consequences, but chose to risk everything for moments of authentic choice. 14th rule: love and simulation. Concubines were forbidden from feeling genuine affection for the Sultan, but also forbidden from not feeling it. They had to simulate love so perfectly it became indistinguishable from reality. But they also had to maintain enough emotional distance to survive inevitable rejection and replacement. This created a psychological tightrope. Few women could walk successfully. Some fell into genuine love and were destroyed by it. Others maintained such complete emotional detachment they became incapable of feeling anything at all. The rare women who found perfect balance between simulation and protection often paid for this skill with their sanity. Becoming performers so accomplished, they lost track of their own authentic emotions. 15th rule: forgetting and remembering. Women who survived the harem system had to learn to forget everything they had experienced, everything they had seen, everything they had been forced to do. They had to become blank slates, empty vessels, ready to be filled with new purposes and new identities. But forgetting wasn't erasure. Memories remained buried deep in the body and unconscious mind. They surfaced in nightmares, in sudden moments of panic, in the inability to trust or love or believe in their own worth. Women carried these invisible scars for the rest of their lives, walking reminders of a system that valued their beauty more than their humanity. Now, standing in that same corridor where we began, older, wiser, and infinitely more tired, you understand that the strange bedroom rules of the imperial harem were never really about sex at all. They were about power. The power to reduce human beings to objects, to transform love into performance, to make survival contingent on complete surrender of self. The eunuch who first whispered these rules to you is long dead, buried in an unmarked grave like countless others who served the palace. The Sultan you knew has been replaced by his son, who has been replaced by his son, in an endless cycle of power and submission. But the rules remain, passed down like a secret language from one generation of women to the next. You survived by forgetting how to be human and learning how to be a shadow. You mastered the art of appearing to exist while actually disappearing. You became an expert in the performance of desire, the simulation of submission, the careful navigation of a world where a single misstep could mean death. And now, as you prepare to whisper these same rules to another frightened 15-year-old girl, you realize you have become the system you once feared. You are the chain connecting past to future, the keeper of knowledge that should have died with the last sultan. The girl standing before you has the same curious eyes you once had, the same hopeful belief that she's about to enter a world of luxury and honor. You know better now. You know she's about to enter a world where the strangest rule of all is that to survive, she must learn to forget she was ever human at all. In the flickering candlelight, you begin to speak, your voice carrying the weight of centuries, your words weaving another invisible chain in the endless cycle of power and submission that defines the imperial harem. And somewhere in the distance, you can hear the sound of water trickling from ornamental fountains. The same sound that welcomed you to this place so many years ago. The same sound that will welcome countless other girls in years to come. The rules never change. Only the faces change. But as we conclude this story, we must never forget that these women were not mere objects. Each could have been a mother, sister, beloved daughter. Each had dreams, fears, hopes. These were voices systematically silenced. In the world we live in today, we must remember that no woman's body should be subject to others' decisions. That every woman has the right to be the author of her own story. Because the powerful never earn the right to crush the weak. This story is told, not just to recount past suffering, but so the future might be more just.